Welcome to Policy Precision, where we take an unbiased look at executive orders.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into Executive Order 14156.
That's the one titled Declaring a National Energy Emergency, signed January 20th, 2025.
Right, and it hit the Federal Register about 9 days later. It's marked as President Trump's 10th EO of his second term.
And that title, National Energy Emergency, that's a pretty strong statement right out of the gate.
It absolutely is. It signals something significant is happening, or at least perceived to be happening. Makes you ask, what's the emergency?
So what is the stated problem here? What's this order trying to fix?
Well, the text lays it out as addressing an inadequate energy and critical minerals capacity in the U.S., basically saying we don't have enough to meet our own needs. And it argues that, stable, affordable energy is fundamental for manufacturing, defense, just everyday life.
And it seems quite direct in placing blame, doesn't it? It mentions harmful and short-sighted policies of the previous administration.
It does. It links those alleged policies directly to high energy prices, saying they're causing hardship, especially for people with lower incomes.
Okay, so that's the economic angle.
Yeah.
But it also heavily leans on national security, right?
Very heavily. The argument is that insufficient domestic energy makes the U.S. vulnerable.
Vulnerable how?
It talks about hostile actors targeting infrastructure, weaponizing reliance on foreign energy, manipulating global markets. So energy security becomes inseparable from national security in this view.
Right, so it's not just about prices at the pump. It's framed as a matter of strategic importance. And infrastructure reliability is mentioned too.
Absolutely. Expanding and securing energy infrastructure across the country is called an immediate and pressing priority.
And there's a sort of optimistic side presented, if we fix this.
Exactly. The order suggests developing untapped domestic resources could create jobs, boost the economy, improve the trade balance.
And even strengthen alliances?
Yes, by making the U.S. a more reliable energy provider, potentially supporting international peace. That's the picture it paints.
But it also gets specific about where the problems are worst.
It does. It points specifically to the Northeast and the West Coast.
And blames dangerous state and local policies in those areas.
Correct. So the introduction wraps up by formally declaring this national emergency, citing insufficient production, transport, refining, generation as an unusual and extraordinary threat.
Okay, so that sets the stage. The why. Now let's get into the how. Section 2 is about emergency approvals. What does that actually mean for agencies?
It's a pretty broad directive. It tells the heads of executive departments and agencies they need to identify and use all lawful emergency powers, plus their regular authorities,
All of them.
to facilitate everything related to domestic energy, identifying resources, leasing land, siting, production, transport, refining, generation, even on federal lands.
So basically, use every tool in the box to push energy projects forward.
That's the gist. It's a strong signal to prioritize these activities.
And you mentioned some specific, quite powerful tools.
It does. Federal eminent domain, the government taking private land for public use, with compensation, of course.
Right.
And the Defense Production Act, which lets the government direct industry during emergencies.
Those are significant powers. Is there any check on using them?
Yes, that's important. Any recommendation to use those specific authorities has to go through the assistant to the president for national security affairs and then to the president. So it requires very high-level sign-off.
Okay, so they're on the table, but not deployed lightly. Section 2 also touched on something consumers might notice: gasoline.
That's right. E15 gasoline specifically, the blend with up to 15% ethanol. The order directs the EPA administrator, after consulting with and getting the okay from the Energy Secretary, to consider issuing emergency waivers.
Waivers for what?
To allow E15 to be sold year-round. The idea is to potentially head off gasoline shortages. Normally, there are restrictions on selling E15 in the summer because of smog concerns. Ah, okay. So potentially lifting those summer restrictions to increase gasoline availability. Got it. Moving to Section 3, expediting the delivery of energy infrastructure. How does this differ from Section 2?
Section 2 was about using emergency approvals. Section 3 is about using emergency authorities to speed up projects that are already authorized and funded.
Ah, so it's about accelerating things already in the pipeline, cutting red tape.
Pretty much. Using emergency powers to get existing, approved infrastructure, energy, environmental, natural resource projects done faster.
And again, it's specific regional focus.
Yes, subsection B points again to the West Coast, the Northeast, and also Alaska. It tells agencies to prioritize facilitating energy supply, refining, and transport in those areas specifically for national and economic security.
Same regions highlighted before. And is there accountability
It
reporting?
is. Section 3C says the relevant secretaries have to report on these activities when asked by the Assistant to the President for Economic Policy, so some oversight is built in. Okay. Section 4 gets into quite a mouthful. Emergency regulations and nationwide permits under the Clean Water Act, CWA, and other statutes administered by the Army Corps of Engineers. What's the core idea here?
It's about streamlining environmental permitting for energy projects, specifically through the Army Corps of Engineers.
How so?
It gives agency heads and the Secretary of the Army 30 days. They need to identify any planned or potential energy projects that could use emergency permitting provisions under several laws.
Which law?
Section 404 of the Clean Water Act that deals with discharging dredged or fill material into waters, Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, activities in navigable waters, and Section 103 of the Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act, ocean dumping.
Okay, so finding projects that fit specific emergency criteria under those acts.
Exactly. They're looking for projects that could potentially qualify for faster emergency-based permitting from the Army Corps.
And once they identify these projects,
Within that 30 days, they have to submit a summary report listing these actions.
it gets the report.
It goes to the OMB director, the Secretary of the Army via the Assistant Secretary for Civil Works, the Assistant to the President for Economic Policy, and the Chair of the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ.
Quite a distribution list.
Right.
High visibility.
Definitely. And the order doesn't just say identify them.
It tells them to use these provisions.
Yes. Section 4B directs agencies to use these emergency permitting provisions to the fullest extent possible under law to boost the nation's energy supply.
And is that it, or is there ongoing reporting? Seems like a theme.
Oh, yes. More reports, 30 days after that initial summary, and then every 30 days for as long as the emergency lasts.
Another report.
Another status report to the same group of officials. It has to detail actions taken, the status of things reported earlier, and any new potential actions identified.
Wow, that's a continuous cycle. Identification, action report, repeat.
Pretty much. And Section 4D adds that the Army Corps and EPA leadership should be available for consultation to make sure this permitting happens promptly.
Okay, that's the Clean Water Act angle. Section 5 tackles the Endangered Species Act, ESA Emergency Consultation Regulations. Similar structure.
Very similar structure, yes.
Right.
Again, a 30-day deadline for agency heads. This time, identify planned or potential energy projects that might fall under the ESA's emergency consultation rules. That's 50 CFR 402.05.
Those are specific, streamlined rules for urgent situations.
Right. Different timelines, different requirements maybe compared to the standard ESA process when there's an emergency.
And another summary report. Different recipients this time.
Correct. This one goes to the Secretaries of Interior and Commerce, the OMB Director, the Director of the National Economic Council, and the CEQ Chair. And just like before, agencies are directed to use these ESA emergency rules as much as the law allows.
So the pattern holds. Identify energy projects, use emergency pathways and environmental law to speed them up. What about the ongoing reports for ESA?
Same deal. A status report 30 days after the initial one, and then every 30 days to the same officials, detailing actions taken, status updates, new items.
So constant updates on ESA consultations too.
Yes, although there's one small difference here. The OMB director can grant exemptions from this specific ongoing ESA reporting requirement.
Ah, interesting. A potential off-ramp for the paperwork there.
Potentially. And this section also mandates that the Secretaries of Interior and Commerce make sure their key services, Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service, are ready for prompt emergency consultations.
It really feels like a concerted push to accelerate projects by navigating environmental laws through these emergency channels.
That seems to be the clear intent.
Okay, then Section 6 focuses on convening the Endangered Species Act Committee. What is this committee, and why is convening it regularly significant?
This committee is sometimes nicknamed the God Squad. It's a high-level group, includes cabinet secretaries and others.
And its power.
It has the authority in very specific circumstances to grant exemptions from the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. Basically, it can allow a project to proceed even if it harms an endangered species if certain criteria are met.
Wow. Has it been used often?
Historically, no. It's been convened quite rarely, usually for really major projects facing significant ESA conflicts.
So what does this order change?
It mandates the Secretary of the Interior, who chairs the committee, to convene it at least quarterly.
Quarterly, that sounds much more frequent.
It's a significant increase. They're to review exemption applications from agencies, state governors, or permit applicants. It signals a much more, shall we say, accessible path to seeking these exemptions for energy projects.
And it sets timelines for their review.
It does. It aims for identifying legal problems within 20 days and resolving the whole application within 140 days of it being deemed initially eligible. That's to the extent practicable under law, but still ambitious targets.
Given the complexity, yeah. And what if no one has applied for an exemption? Does the committee still meet quarterly?
Yes, Section 6C says even without pending applications, the committee or its reps must meet.
To do what?
To identify obstacles to domestic energy infrastructure that arise specifically from the ESA or the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The goal is to find ways to improve procedures, regulations, and interagency coordination.
So even without specific cases, they're tasked with finding ways to make the ESA less of an obstacle for energy development during this emergency.
That's a fair reading. It's proactive scrutiny of the ESA's impact on energy.
Definitely a strong signal. Okay, Section 7, Coordinated Infrastructure Assistance. This brings in the Department of Defense.
It does. The Secretary of Defense, working with Interior and Energy, gets 60 days to assess the military's ability to get and transport the energy, electricity, and fuel it needs.
For operations both here and overseas.
Correct. It's basically an audit of the military's energy supply chain security.
Checking for weak spots. Is there a geographic focus again?
Yes, the assessment needs to pinpoint vulnerabilities, especially in transport and refining infrastructure nationwide, but with a specific focus again on the Northeast and West Coast.
Those regions keep coming up.
They do. And the assessment must recommend authorities and resources needed to fix any identified vulnerabilities. It suggests a worry that energy issues in those regions could affect military readiness.
And if they find vulnerabilities, the order points to a potential solution.
It does. Section 7B specifically invokes a Military Construction Authority 10 U.S.C. 2808.
Making it available to whom?
To the Secretary of the Army, via the Assistant Secretary for Civil Works, to potentially build things to address those energy vulnerabilities identified in the assessment.
So potentially using military construction capabilities for energy infrastructure deemed critical to defense.
That's the implication. Though, importantly, any such proposed actions are subject to presidential review.
Still a significant potential involvement. Section 8 is just definitions, right? Clarifying terms.
Yes, pretty standard but crucial. It defines what energy or energy resources means, and it's a broad list: fossil fuels, renewables, nuclear, and defines production, transportation, refining, generation, energy supply, helps ensure everyone's working off the same playbook regarding the order's scope.
Good to have that clarity. And finally, Section 9, General Provisions. Anything key limitations or boilerplates in there?
A few standard but important points. It says the order doesn't override existing legal authorities of agencies or the OMB director's budget functions.
I read stuff.
Implementation is subject to law and funding availability. And crucially, Section 9C.
What's that?
It states the order does not create any legally enforceable right or benefit for anyone against the U.S. government. Meaning, while it tells agencies to do things, individuals or companies can't sue the government under this order if they feel the agencies aren't doing enough or if they don't get the outcome they want. It's an internal government directive, not a source of new public legal rights.
Got it. So wrapping up this deep dive on EO 14156, a declared national energy emergency.
Based on stated concerns about inadequate supply, high prices blamed on past policies, and national security risks.
And the core action is directing federal agencies to use emergency powers and all existing authorities to aggressively ramp up domestic energy production and infrastructure.
Right, with a major focus on streamlining environmental reviews under the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act, using emergency provisions and convening the ESA committee much more often.
Plus, heavy reporting requirements, coordination efforts, and even potential DoD involvement in fixing infrastructure weaknesses, especially in the Northeast and West Coast.
It's definitely a sweeping order aiming for rapid change in domestic energy policy and development.
So this leaves us, and you, with some big questions to think about. What are the potential short-term versus long-term effects of using a national emergency declaration like this for energy policy.
And how might this order change the practical application of environmental laws like the CWA and ESA? What does it mean for the balance between federal priorities and state or local energy policies?
If you want to dig deeper, looking into the National Emergencies Act itself could be insightful. That's the underlying law.
Yeah, and maybe exploring the details of the Defense Production Act, the CWA Section 404, or the ESA emergency consultation rules mentioned here would give you a fuller picture of the tools being brought to bear.
And stepping back, what does this all suggest about the larger conversations we're having about energy independence, environmental protection, and fundamentally the scope and use of executive power to tackle what are seen as major national challenges?
Lots to consider there. It's certainly complex.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this detailed look at Executive Order 14156.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the policies shaping our world.